So Joe Biden has made the decision to send Ukraine cluster bombs. Now, this is being highly, highly scrutinized and criticized for the simple fact that cluster bombs are illegal in over 100 countries because of the disastrous effect that they have on civilians. So let me give you some facts on it, and then we're going to get to a Democratic congresswoman who basically steps up and roasted Biden for this decision and effectively tried to get him to change his mind. So here's what they say in the BBC. Cluster bombs. Biden defends decision to send Ukraine controversial weapons. U.S. President Joe Biden has defended his very difficult decision to give Ukraine cluster bombs, which have a record of killing civilians. The president said it had taken him a while to be convinced to do it, but he acted because the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. Ukraine's leader hailed the timely move, but the UK's PM suggested the country discourages the use of cluster bombs, while Spain criticized the decision. When asked about his position on the U.S. decision, Rishi Sunak highlighted the UK was one of 123 countries that had signed up to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, which prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions and discourages their use. Spain's defense minister, Margarita Robles, told reporters her country had a firm commitment that certain weapons and bombs could not be sent to Ukraine. Quote, no to cluster bombs and yes to the legitimate defense of Ukraine, which we understand should not be carried out with cluster bombs, she said. But Germany, which is a signatory of the treaty, said that while it would not provide such weapons to Ukraine, it understood the American position. Quote, we're certain that our U.S. friends didn't take the decision about supplying such ammunition lightly, German government spokesman Stefan Hebestreet told reporters in Berlin. Mr. Biden told CNN in an interview on Friday that he had spoken to allies about the decision, which was announced ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania next week. The U.S., Ukraine, and Russia have not signed up to the convention, and both Moscow and Kyiv have used cluster bombs during the war. Now, by the way, when they used it, the U.S. implied, well, this is a war crime. But now we want to send it to Ukraine, so all of a sudden, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told Friday's daily White House briefing that officials recognize the cluster munitions create a risk of civilian harm from unexploded bombs, but he said Ukraine was running out of artillery and needed a bridge of supplies while the U.S. ramps up domestic production. We will not leave Ukraine defenseless at any point in this conflict period, he said. Ukraine's defense minister has given assurances the cluster bombs would not be used in urban areas and only to break through enemy defense lines. So they show you how cluster bombs work here. Basically, munition is fired from the ground or air, bomblets are released, and then bomblets fall to the ground. Not all of them detonate immediately. That's an important point. Where these have been used elsewhere, they kill civilians long after the wars are done. So that's... The munitions have caused controversy over their failure or dud rate, meaning unexploded small bombs can linger on the ground for years and indiscriminately detonate later on. Mr. Sullivan told reporters the American cluster bombs being sent to Ukraine were far safer than those he said were already being used by Russia in the conflict. He told reporters the U.S. ones have a dud rate of less than 2.5%, while Russia's have a dud rate between 30 and 40%. Mr. Biden's move will bypass U.S. law prohibiting the production, use, or transfer of cluster munitions with a failure rate of more than 1%. Okay, let me repeat that. Mr. Biden's move will bypass U.S. law. That's another way of saying what he's doing is totally illegal and not allowed, and he's willy-nilly ignoring the law. Now, let me ask Republicans this. You guys try to impeach him over a million things that are totally illegitimate and stupid. Will anybody make a peep about maybe impeaching him over this? Sending illegal weapons? Nobody will do it. Of course nobody will do it, because this would be something that's like kind of legitimate. You can't just ignore the law at your whim, especially something as important as this. Early on in the war, when the White House was asked about allegations that Russia was using cluster and vacuum bombs, the then press secretary said it would be a potential war crime if true. There has been a mixed reaction among the U.S. president's Democratic Party, more than a dozen of whom have spoken out against the plan. Props to the more than a dozen. Human rights groups also criticized the decision, with Amnesty International saying cluster munitions pose a grave threat to civilian lives, even long after the conflict has ended. The U.S. Cluster Munition Coalition, which is part of an international civil society campaign working to eradicate the weapons, said they would cause greater suffering today and for decades to come. The UN Human Rights Office has also been critical, with a representative saying the use of such munitions should stop immediately and not be used in any place. So look, this is one of those situations where our answer to the world is, when you do it, it's bad and wrong. When we do it, it's good. I mean, that's the gist of it, right? By the way, in places where it's been used, understand that the cluster munitions end up killing, and I'm not kidding about this number, 97% civilians. 97%. Now, look, you can make an argument those were older, inferior weapons and the dud rate is way less now or whatever. I'm not going to take their word for it. Why would I take their word for it? That's the last thing you should do. They've proven themselves to be dishonest, and now people want to turn around and take their word for it. So look, these are banned by 123 countries. It's banned under U.S. law, and we're still going to send it. Now, understand, I am 100% on the side of Ukraine defending their national sovereignty. The war waged by Putin was illegal and offensive. It was aggressive. And I don't care what rationalizations they trot out there, because, of course, in every war, the aggressor has their rationalizations. But they trotted out a whole list of rationalizations about, oh my God, NATO was encroaching on our border and you were threatening us. No sane, rational person will tell you that NATO was about to overthrow Vladimir Putin and what he just did was, defensive. Or Ukraine was in the process of overthrowing Putin, so he was just being defensive. No reasonable person will tell you that. So we're left with the reality that it was an illegal and offensive war waged by Putin against a country that didn't attack him. Okay? I'm on Ukraine's side. But that doesn't mean that we could just disregard law, which is law in this case for a reason. There's a reason why chemical weapons are banned. There's a reason why cluster bombs are banned. And we can't just roll back the clock anytime we get into a situation like this. Because look, at the end of that line of logic is what? Well, I know we're not supposed to use a nuke. We shouldn't use a nuke, but I guess we could use if it's just a little nuke and it's just a tactical one. And if it's used here, then we could try to limit the civilian casualties. Next thing you know, you're rationalizing and justifying all sorts of objectively evil, horrible, terrible, horrendous, immoral, unethical actions. I don't want to end up there. But that's the U.S.'s game, right? The whole game of the U.S. is when we do it, it's okay. When our allies do it, it's okay. When you do it, we're going to say it's illegal, it's not allowed, and maybe your regime should be changed as a result of it. So now that brings me to Barbara Lee. Barbara Lee went on CNN, the show State of the Union with Jake Tapper. I almost said Jack Tapper. And here's what she said.
No, cluster bombs should never be used. That's crossing a line. Once you see what takes place, we know what takes place in terms of cluster bombs being very dangerous to civilians. They don't always immediately explode. Children can step on them. That's a line we should not cross. I think the president's been doing a good job managing this war, this Putin aggressive war against Ukraine, but I think that this should not happen. He had to ask for a waiver under the Foreign Assistance Act just to do it, because we have been preventing the use of cluster bombs since, I believe, 2010.
So when Putin started using cluster bombs, the Biden White House said that would potentially be a war crime. Do you think that, therefore, the U.S. government, the Biden administration, will potentially be engaging in war crimes if this goes forward?
What I think is that we would risk losing our moral leadership, because when you look at the fact that over 120 countries have signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions.
The answer to that question, by the way, here's what you're supposed to say. Yes. Yes. Does that mean Biden will be, complicit in war crimes? Yes. That's exactly what that means. Because you can't just do these carve-outs, like I said. It's not okay when we do it, bad when you do it. But the only area where I disagree is we lost our moral leadership a long, long time ago. After World War II, we inherited this notion that we're the world's sole superpower, we're the world police, and we've used that logic to justify all sorts of imperialist actions, all sorts of exploitation. Look at the war in Iraq. It's the perfect example. Look at the war in Afghanistan. We're talking about illegal and offensive wars against countries that didn't attack us. And we ended up setting up shop there for 20 years or more. And it's totally unacceptable. And then once you bring in the idea of the military-industrial complex and Dwight Eisenhower warning about how dangerous it is, about how war becomes a business and people want to perpetuate it to continue to make money, it gets very, very nefarious and very scary. And there's been no reckoning with these facts. It's just when we do something illegal and wrong, it is not illegal and wrong by definition, because we're the good guys by definition. But that's how every empire throughout history and time has ever thought. That's what everybody says. When we do it, it's okay. When you do it, it's wrong. No, we have to be better than that. I'm 100% in favor of Ukraine defending themselves from Russian aggression. I hope they succeed. I hope they win. I hope we get peace at the end of all this and a negotiated settlement, which is acceptable to all parties. But I certainly don't hope that the U.S. Engages in war crimes and sells illegal weapons in the process of doing it, because that's unacceptable when anybody does it. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.